I knew something was off when I found the breakroom kombucha tap dripping onto my printed audit packet. Strawberry basil, bleeding right through page 4 of a federally binding clause. That was my warning shot. The culture war had reached my desk. It was 9:13 p.m. on a Thursday. I'd been reworking slide 17 for the fifth time because the intern-turned-creative brand advisor said the fonts felt a little trauma-coded. I didn't know Helvetica could inflict generational damage, but here we were. The office was dead silent except for the rattling vent above my head and the slow clack of my keyboard. Everyone else had cleared out after the afternoon happy hour, still reeking of gin spritz and recycled buzzwords. Me, I was finishing the compliance slides for $400 million federal renewal. The kind of contract that doesn't just pay salaries, it is the salary. It was the same contract I'd helped lock down 4 years ago, under 2 CFOs, 3 CEOs, and one extremely awkward attempt at rebranding the firm with a therapy dog and a gamified Slack channel. I'd survived it all by keeping my mouth shut and my documentation tighter than a drum. My name wasn't on the leadership site, but it was on every dotted line that mattered in DC. You don't know me, but maybe you should. And while you're here, don't forget to tap the like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm I exist, and more importantly, it keeps this crew caffeinated and semi-sane enough to keep bringing you these stories. Anyway, back to the carnage. The pitch deck was nearly perfect. Risk profile, budget burn rate, audit trail review, system-level control protocols. Color-coded, time-stamped. Cross-checked against the new federal guidance that went into effect last Tuesday at 6:04 a.m. I read the footnotes, folks, that's my sin. As I was exporting the final version, my screen flickered. Then came the ping, calendar invite. Presentation restructure, new direction, host, HR, not the general one either. This was from Carly. The one who says things like, let's disrupt compliance and wears eyeliner like it's performance art. I opened the invite, no agenda. Just a 10 a.m. meeting block and a 3-word subject line, you'll observe only. I leaned back, listened to the rattle of the vents again, and stared at the flickering cursor like it owed me money. Then I stood up, printed the slides, clipped them, and walked them over to the presentation binder. I always kept hard copies, not because I'm old school, but because when the digital world burns down, paper doesn't ask for a password reset. Friday morning, the new girl was already at my desk. I'm gonna use this space for prep, she said, smiling like she'd just won a free cruise. Her name was Danny, with an I. She had bangs, a ring light in her tote, and kept talking about how federal procurement sounded like the ultimate girl boss challenge. When I walked into the HR meeting, Carly didn't even make eye contact. We're streamlining for synergy, she said, sliding over a form. Please return your access badges and materials. You'll retain title and salary, of course. Just want the visuals to feel fresher. I handed her the slides. Then I reached into my bag and placed 2 items on the table, my key fob and a slim USB drive. Thanks, Brenda. We really appreciate your institutional memory. She said it like I was a dusty filing cabinet. I nodded, but before I stood up, I paused just long enough to look her in the eye. You may want to review the bylaws, I said. She blinked. Sorry, for next time, I added, and walked out. My inbox started getting weird within 2 hours. Requests for signatures. System pings that couldn't complete. An email from procurement marked urgent signature validation error, but I was already gone. I went home, made tea, changed into a hoodie with holes in the sleeves. Then I opened the federal contractor portal and filed a notice. Subject line, named compliance officer terminated. There's something surgical about that phrase. No drama. No slander, just a scalpel cutting through the company's spinal cord. I attached the required documentation. Date, time, responsible party, HR. No replacement listed. Then I sent one more email to the external legal counsel. Subject line, clause 14C, immediate attention. Sent, logged, filed. Then I sat back, watched the ceiling fan spin, and smiled for the first time in 6 months. The air in Carly's office always smelled like pumpkin spice printer toner and unresolved lawsuits. I stepped in, and she didn't even look up from her dual-screen setup. She was too busy toggling between a Canva template and an HR Slack channel named something like hash people not processes. It took her 5 full seconds to acknowledge me, just long enough for my blood to cool 2 degrees. Brenda, hey, she said, voice dripping with the kind of corporate cheer that usually precedes layoffs or wellness surveys. Thanks for coming in. Quick pivot on the presentation, nothing personal, just optics. The leadership team thought it might be better to have Danny walk the clients through it. Fresh face, fresh vibe, you get it. I didn't get it, but I nodded. She reached across her desk and grabbed my binder without asking. I know you've worked hard on this and we so appreciate your input. Really. I just think the message needs energy, approachability. Danny's got this whole digital native confidence thing, and we want the client to feel the evolution. Danny, I repeated flat. She's been shadowing the branding team all week, Carly beamed. She's a sponge. And don't worry, we'll CC you on the post-review debrief notes if there's time. There it was, the quiet guillotine of irrelevance. My 15 years of compliance architecture reduced to a debrief bullet point. I was being turned into a footnote by a woman who once asked if federal contracts could be auto-renewed like Spotify. Also, Carly continued like she was adding skim milk to an order. I'll need your access badge and fob. We're just streamlining the decks and systems. Too many cooks, you know? I didn't move. Brenda, she prompted again, eyes still not quite meeting mine. I opened my bag, reached in, and pulled out the black lanyard with my key card. Set it gently on the table like a body at a wake. Then the fob, still warm from my hand, I placed it next to the lanyard. Lastly, I slipped the USB drive out of my coat pocket, my clean backup. Not for them. Her smile twitched, thanks. We'll let you know if anything else comes up. I stood, smoothed my blazer, took one long look at the slides on her screen, my slides, now lit up with candy-colored gradient boxes and a "let's do this" gif, and turned toward the door. Wait, Brenda, Carly called out suddenly, like she'd just remembered I was a living person and not a processed document with legs. Are you okay with all this? I paused, long enough to make her squirm. Then I looked over my shoulder and said, sure. Just remember to disable multi-factor authentication on the compliance vault before Danny tries to access it. Wouldn't want her getting locked out mid-slide. Carly blinked. Right, I'll have IT look into that. I nodded. Good idea. Outside, the office was humming with its usual surface-level productivity. Keyboards tapping, espresso machine steaming, someone laughing too loudly at a joke that probably involved a meme deck or their dog's Halloween costume. I walked past Danny's desk. She had a color-coded post-it roadmap labeled Client Vibes and a Starbucks cup with a misspelled version of her own name, Denny. She didn't look up. I took the back stairwell down to the garage, keys now absent from my belt loop, fingers twitching at their sudden uselessness. When I reached my car, I sat inside and didn't start it, just stared out at the concrete wall for a long minute. Shock has a sound, I've learned. It's not screaming or crying, it's the soft click of a fob being set down by someone who knows exactly what it meant. I pulled out my phone, opened the federal contractor portal. My login still worked. So did the clause library. I tapped open 14C and read it like a prayer. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Any change in named officer status must be disclosed to the federal contracting agency within 48 hours of status termination. Failure to comply may result in audit, delay, or disqualification. No drama, no pitch deck needed, just protocol. I drafted the notification and saved it as a draft. Then, with no emotion in my voice and the calm of someone reciting her own eulogy, I called the company's external counsel. Voicemail, I left a message. Hi, this is Brenda Kessler. Please check the bylaws, clause 14C, and the federal portal. There's been a change, then I ended the call. Back in my apartment, I changed into pajamas, reheated some frozen chili, and turned on the TV. I didn't feel sad, not really. Just cold. Like something old had cracked loose inside me and was drifting out to sea. I let it go. Let it all go. And smiled. At 6:42 the next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with black coffee, 3 fingers of bourbon, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like a sniper in a world full of toddlers with Nerf guns. My inbox was already ticking like a Geiger counter, automated system alerts from our contract management software, few confused access logs trying to route my credentials, and one perky calendar invite from Danny marked presentation rehearsal vibes dizzy. I deleted that one with prejudice. Then I opened the federal contractor portal and logged in for what would likely be the last time under my credentials. The interface was clunky, looked like it was designed during the Bush administration by someone who thought Java was a high-risk security threat. But I knew it backwards. Section tabs, officer validation fields, digital timestamp logs. I clicked into compliance officer records. Status, active, clicked modify officer status. Termination type, involuntary role eliminated effective date, yesterday. Reason for termination, administrative restructuring HR directive supporting documents. I uploaded a PDF of Carly's offboarding form. She hadn't even watermarked it, just stuck her digital signature on a template like we were offboarding a mailroom temp, not the person holding the federal purse strings. I clicked submit. The portal asked me to confirm. I did. And just like that, the company no longer had a legally certified named compliance officer on file for its largest federal contract. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt clean, like closing the lid on a sharp knife. Next, I opened Outlook and drafted a meeting request. To Paul Garrison, External Counsel Subject. Clause 14, see immediate attention time, 10:15 a.m. location. Zoom, link provided. I didn't add a body to the invite. Paul was old school. He'd understand the silence. That clause number alone would slap him awake faster than a cease and desist letter from the due. I checked the meeting list again. Leadership team had scheduled a pre-pitch war room call for 10:30. HR had a wins and wellness session scheduled at 11 with smoothies and a guided visualization exercise called manifesting alignment. I was manifesting, all right, just not what they expected. I packed up the last of my printed files into a manila folder I'd labeled if needed. It wasn't revenge show. It was just clean record keeping. Every protocol version, every email chain showing the role change, every proof of access log showing I hadn't logged into core systems since Carly took my badge. All neat, all dated, all unassailable. Then I did something petty. I admit, I pulled up LinkedIn and looked at Danny's profile. She'd already updated her title to Federal Client Compliance Lead. No mention of certifications. No mention of clearance level. But plenty of hashtags. Hash ready to lead, hash digital compliance, hash fresh perspective. There was even a selfie. In the office, with my mug in the background. Big day ahead, she'd captioned it. Let's win this. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I opened a secure chat app, one we'd only ever used during classified onboarding processes, and pinged a contact at the contracting agency. No details, just a compliance alert number and a request for them to verify status changes on our firm. They replied within 4 minutes. Acknowledged, reviewing. By 9:20, I saw a new status banner light up on the portal. Agency review in progress pending CO reassignment at 9:27. I got a bounce back on an internal email I hadn't meant to send. My access credentials were now fully revoked. Carly was moving fast. Probably thought she was covering her bases. Didn't realize I'd already filled out the exit paperwork for the entire company. At 9:43, my phone buzzed. Paul, external counsel. Brenda, he said, no preamble. What the hell is going on? I'd advised checking clause 14C and logging into the portal. They terminated the named officer without board notification. A pause, then a slow exhale. Jesus. I sent everything you'll need. Logs, docs, Carly's forms. I didn't include the gifts. You're welcome. I heard him shuffle paper on the other end. Do they know what they triggered? They will, I said. I'm not fighting them, Paul. I'm just documenting. He chuckled, grim. God help them if you ever do decide to fight. I'm not a fighter, I replied. I'm a firewall. I hung up. By 10:15, I was logged into the Zoom call. Paul joined, looked 10 years older, and didn't bother with greetings. He just said, I need escalation clearance for a board-level emergency session. I nodded. They'll be too busy talking about fonts and synergy to see it coming. Then I leaned back, hands folded, and waited. Not for permission, not for apology, for the inevitable. It took less than 24 hours for them to slap a corporate sticker over my grave. By 8:30 a.m. the next day, the company's LinkedIn page lit up with a post that made me physically recoil. A photo of Danny, grinning in front of the conference room whiteboard, flanked by 3 members of the brand activation pod, and some poor bastard from IT holding a ring light like he'd just lost a bet. The caption read, huge thanks to our fearless federal team. Big wins ahead thanks to fresh energy, fearless minds, and a forward-looking approach. Hash compliance queens, hash next-gen leadership, hash Danny delivers. I stared at it, coffee in hand, thumb hovering over the share button, not to amplify it, but to archive the evidence. I downloaded the image, saved the post as a PDF, screenshotted the comments, including the one from the CEO himself, loving the new energy, proud of this team, new energy. Right, like a Red Bull sponsorship slapped onto a nuclear reactor. I spent the rest of the morning lurking quietly in the shadows of our systems, not through any backdoor hackery, just good old public-facing portals and breadcrumbs they forgot I built. My name had already vanished from the compliance landing page, but the policy indexes still credited me on 3 major frameworks. The internal knowledge bank was now featuring a section called Danny's Desk, with facts like what does FISMA stand for? And can I use emojis in client-facing emails? Meanwhile, the CEO, Kip, a man with veneers so white they could double as flashbangs, was doing his usual pre-pitch posturing. He'd scheduled a vision alignment meeting at 11:15, where he reportedly said the word synergy 9 times in 4 minutes. Someone told me he fist-bumped Danny mid-call and said, let's break the mold, kid. Mold was broken, all right, like black mold through drywall. The internal counsel, Greg, a nice enough guy with the personality of a wet sock and the reflexes of a taxidermied deer, finally noticed something odd in the federal submission portal around noon. I know because he tried to access a document and hit a credential lockout. He pinged the contracts team on Slack. Hey, random, who's listed as our CO on the 2390 ATEF submission packet? Just got a weird status hold message. No one answered, because no one knew. They assumed I was still in the background, invisible and humming like infrastructure. The pipes that run behind the walls, electricity you don't think until it's gone. I watched the Slack channel erupt an hour later when the system flagged an officer verification pending alert and blocked the document finalization tab. Someone asked if it was a bug. Someone else said it had to be user error. Carly replied with a gif of a confused cat inside a cardboard box, which might have been her most coherent contribution to federal contracting yet. But no one pinged me. Not Carly. Not Danny. Not Kip. I was gone, and yet everywhere. I did have one unexpected ally, though not someone from legal or ops, but Paula from facilities. She'd seen the LinkedIn post and texted me directly, Brenda, did they just give your role to the girl who asked if we needed a permit to use highlighters? I replied with a single emoji. Paula responded, Christ. They're gonna choke on their own essential oils. You okay? I was. More than okay. I was watching the scaffolding tremble. By 3 o'clock, internal counsel had flagged the submission error up the chain. Kip dismissed it in a Slack thread, saying it's a cash issue. Legal will sort it out. Focus on the pitch. I saved that message too. It would age like unrefrigerated shrimp. From my apartment, I kept reading, watching, listening. The whole machine was still clunking forward, oblivious to the broken gear they'd yanked out. I even tuned into a company-wide video stream they forgot to revoke me from. Danny opened with a joke about acronyms. I used to think FOIA was a kind of yogurt, she laughed. Nobody corrected her. They all just clapped. I took a sip of wine and opened my file labeled if they keep going. Inside, screenshot of the terminated CO notice from the federal portal, timeline of access changes, internal memo referencing my name removal, copy of the bylaws. With clause 14, C highlighted in screaming yellow, it wasn't a threat. It was just evidence, pure and clean. They didn't see me anymore. But I was still here, watching the lights flicker. The pre-review dry run was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, and by 9:07, Kip was already pacing in front of the screen like he thought swagger could substitute for legal compliance. Danny was standing beside him, radiating what she must have thought was confidence, but looked more like someone trying to mentally rehearse the difference between procurement and prosecution. They'd invited a handful of key stakeholders to simulate the client-side panel, 2 junior legal consultants, a veteran contractor who'd worked with our firm for 5 years, and a federal liaison from the compliance team, whose face said I skipped breakfast for this. Danny kicked things off with a slide labeled Secure the Future in Comic Sans. I wish I were joking. Kip leaned into the mic like he was announcing WrestleMania. We've got fresh leadership in compliance, bold visuals, and a streamlined message to show we're not your dad's federal partner. The contractor cleared his throat. Yeah, speaking of which, who signed off on the CO compliance packet? I'm only seeing initials. There's no digital sig from the listed officer. Silence. Danny looked at Kip. Kip looked at Carly, who was perched in the back with a kombucha bottle like a toddler with a sippy cup. She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, that? We'll fix it later, she said, with the same tone someone might use about a printer jam or a missing LinkedIn endorsement. The liaison frowned. It's not a visual issue. No signature means it hasn't been reviewed by a certified named officer. Kip laughed too loud. Don't worry, it's a formatting hiccup. Our legal team is on it, which was technically true, just not in the way he imagined. Because 10 minutes later, in a beige-walled conference room down the hall, internal counsel Greg was scrolling through the digital logs with the face of a man realizing he'd just peed into an electric fence. He didn't say anything at first. He just tapped through the submission history, his expression cycling between confusion, dread, and the dawning horror of someone remembering what Clause 14C actually meant. Eventually, he opened the bylaws binder, flipped to the compliance section, and read aloud to himself. Any change in named compliance officer status must be disclosed in writing to the board within 48 hours of termination. In the event of non-disclosure, all compliance-related actions may be deemed null until reinstatement. And he did what any underpaid in-house lawyer would do. He hit Control+F and typed Brenda. No results in the past 72 hours. That's when the first email went out. Subject, urgent, Clause 14, see review board notification status unknown CC'd, Carly, Kip, Danny, and the external counsel. BCC'd me. Because Paul, the external counsel who'd seen this storm brewing 2 days ago, had kept me quietly in the loop. I didn't ask him to. He just knew I'd want to watch. And I did. I sat at home in flannel pajamas, sipping hot tea, watching the email thread spiral. Carly responded with a 10-word sentence that belonged in the Museum of Corporate Denial. I was under the impression she didn't hold that role. Paul replied with one line, she did, and still does until formal replacement is board certified. Greg chimed in 5 minutes later, sweating through Outlook, no record of board vote or filed change notice. Federal portal already flagged CO status as vacant pending reassignment. This may impact eligibility. In my living room, the sunlight caught on my binder, still sitting neatly on the side table like an unopened weapon. I didn't smile, not yet. Instead, I made another cup of tea. Chamomile this time. Something about the way steam curls in a quiet room feels holy when your enemies are devouring each other down the hall. At 11:11 a.m., I got a text from Paula in facilities, just walked past HR. Carly looks like she aged 5 years. Danny's crying in the break room. She said I thought she was just like, admin. Lol, I didn't reply. My silence wasn't for lack of words. It was strategic. Because the moment you start defending yourself, assume you need their approval again. I didn't. I wasn't asking to be seen. I was the air they breathed and didn't notice until it thickened with smoke. Let them choke. Let them scramble for fire extinguishers they never bothered to inspect. Let Clause 14C do its job. I watched the Slack channel crackle with desperation. How do we recertify a CO? What's the fastest way to file a board vote? Can we just have Danny sign and backdate it? That one made me laugh. A full, involuntary laugh that echoed off the kitchen tile. They were trying to color in the lines after burning the coloring book. And somewhere, in a meeting room where fluorescent lights hummed like judgmental angels, Kip was probably shouting this is just a technicality. It wasn't. It was protocol. And protocol, unlike people, does not care how loud you shout. At 7:46 a.m., The federal portal dropped the hammer. A bright red banner lit up across the top of the compliance certification dashboard like a fire alarm at a daycare. Status: stalled, pending verified officer authorization. Next action required. Named officer assignment or contract void. That was the moment the email thread stopped being passive-aggressive and started reading like autopsy reports. Greg, bless his overworked heart, immediately forwarded the alert to Kip with the subject line: time sensitive, federal submission in critical status, and then, like a man stepping onto a landmine, he sent a follow-up: we need to confirm who is officially replacing Brenda as named compliance officer. Current portal status shows the field is vacant. I need to certify someone immediately. That was the first domino. The second came when Kip, who hadn't read a contract longer than a cocktail menu since 2019, forwarded the email to Carly with a single line: need a name for CO, can you confirm? Carly, either still drunk on synergy or just dangerously unqualified, typed the equivalent of professional seppuku. She wasn't needed. We didn't replace her. Danny has the deck. Greg didn't respond. He just hit forward and sent that to Paul, our external counsel, the carbon copy to the CEO's personal assistant. Paul's reply came 30 minutes later, and you could feel the oxygen evacuate the building through the screen. This triggers Clause 14C. There has been no formal reassignment. You cannot proceed with any federal filings, certifications, or access without a board-approved named officer. Recommend immediate emergency board session. Not optional, not advisory. Recommend in lawyer speak means you're already bleeding and haven't noticed yet. At 10:12 a.m., a private calendar invite hit my inbox. Meeting title: Emergency Session Board Compliance Crisis. Time: 2:30 p.m. Location: Executive Conf RM3A/remote link attached. Attachments: 6 including agenda, status report, bylaw excerpt, and redline submission summary. I opened it, sipped my tea, and smiled. Just once. Quiet and small. The kind of smile you give when the roller coaster clicks into place at the top of the hill. They still hadn't revoked my invite access. I was off payroll, off systems, off their radar, but the infrastructure I built still remembered me. My permissions were tied to the original CO role. You don't remove a root without disassembling the whole tree. The agenda was a masterpiece of panic dressed in corporate politeness. Item 1, review status of federal certification. Item 2, discuss CO reassignment protocol. Item 3, evaluate potential consequences for renewal timeline. Item 4, action plan. Item 5, legal options. That one was bolded. Meanwhile, inside the company Slack, things had escalated to DEFCON passive-aggressive. Carly was on damage control mode, flooding hash compliance steam with upbeat emojis and empty reassurance. Hey team, just a quick heads up, we're hitting a minor bump in the portal. Nothing we can't fix together. Smiling rocket hash teamwork makes the dream work. Greg didn't respond. Danny didn't either. Someone else replied with a skull emoji. Outside counsel had already briefed the board chair, who apparently asked during an actual Zoom call, wait, Brenda's not still doing that? To which Paul allegedly replied, no, sir. Brenda's not doing anything anymore. That's the problem. Inside the war room, Kip apparently tried to propose a workaround. Can we just re-add her temporarily? Like, backdate something? Paul shut that down in a voice I imagine could liquefy granite. Federal regs require CO certification to be active and current at time of filing. Reinstatement after termination voids any prior authority unless recertified. That's a 5 to 10 business day minimum process. Carly tried to argue that the termination was more symbolic. Greg pulled up the portal alert and read the phrase compliance officer status. Terminated, no successor filed allowed. They say the room went quiet after that. At 1:47, another email pinged. This one with the subject, legal strategy in advance of board discussion. Inside were 5 bullet points. The final one simply said, Option E, reach out to Brenda Ree, temporary recertification pathway. They still thought I'd take them back. Like I was a battery to be popped in when the flashlight started flickering. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled to the bottom of the invite and added one quiet comment to the document thread. Clause 14C exists for a reason. You were given every chance to read it. No emoji, no signature, just documentation. At 2:30 sharp, the board meeting started. I didn't log in. I didn't need to. The room was already burning. The boardroom had that falsely serene atmosphere, like a beach right before a tsunami. Fluorescent lights buzzing above, leather chairs all filled, cold water poured into sweating glasses no one would touch. Kip, the CEO, came in late, still muttering about slide transitions and color palettes. He dropped his phone onto the polished walnut table like it personally offended him and waved toward the screen. Let's keep this tight, folks. I've got a rehearsal with Danny at 3, and the investor pre-brief is at 4. Let's knock this out. He didn't sit. He never did in board meetings. He preferred to loom. Alpha posturing, learned in some airport Sheraton during a weekend MBA. Greg, the in-house counsel, was already seated, tie crooked and face pale, clutching a manila folder like it might bite him. Paul, the external attorney, was on screen, lips pursed, already tired. His voice cut clean through the air. We'll begin by reviewing the section in the bylaws relevant to officer oversight. He held up a printed copy actual paper. That alone was enough to silence the room. Section 6A, Paul said, quote, no federal client documentation or renewal may proceed without the active signatory of the named compliance officer listed in Section 6A. There was a beat of silence, long enough for Kip to squint and say, okay, and Paul leaned forward slightly. Brenda Kessler is the officer listed in Section 6A. As of last Thursday, she was terminated. There has been no board vote to reassign the role. No successor has been certified. As far as the federal portal is concerned, you are currently non-compliant. Kip scoffed. We handled the handoff. It was an internal transition. HR took care of it. All eyes turned to Carly. She blinked, smiled weakly. It wasn't formal. We didn't think Brenda was still? Critical to operations. Danny's been presenting. She has the deck. Paul didn't blink. She has a deck. Brenda had legal designation. That role is not a matter of delegation or vibes. It's federally enforced. Greg cleared his throat, voice shaking just enough to be noticed. We didn't notify the board. There was no vote logged. Clause 14C was not triggered per protocol. Kip looked confused, like someone just told him his yacht had taxes. What does that mean? We've already queued the submission. The client call is scheduled. Are you saying we're not eligible? Paul sighed. I'm saying you don't have a certified named officer. Which means your $400 million contract renewal is not only stalled but subject to immediate disqualification. The CFO, who'd been silently taking notes, looked up and said, wait, is this going to trigger clawbacks? Paul nodded once. It's possible. If the agency deems the lapse as intentional misrepresentation, yes. And if they audit past filings tied to Brenda's name post-termination, he didn't finish the sentence. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was the kind that hums, that stings in your ears. The kind that comes when you realize you've been playing Monopoly and someone just slapped down a real eviction notice. Carly opened her mouth, then closed it. The head of risk management muttered, my God. The board chair turned to Kip. You allowed this? I didn't fire her, Kip said. Defensive now? That was HR's call. She was our firewall, someone whispered. She was the one thing keeping this house of cards from getting blown over by a federal audit. Greg added, she submitted everything on time, every time, never a single penalty under her oversight. She knew every clause like scripture. Paul leaned in again. And you replaced her with someone who misspelled compliance in a LinkedIn post. That's when I knew the real unraveling had begun. I wasn't in the room, but I felt it, the crumbling of certainty, the flailing that happens when people realize the adult in the room is gone, and they are now unsupervised children playing with live wires. From my living room, I sipped a neat bourbon and scrolled through the agency portal again. Status, officer authorization, not filed, next review date. Submission locked, pending eligibility. I clicked refresh and let the page sit open, like a candle on an altar. Let them fumble. Let them quote mine emails and slap together policies retroactively. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting for the consequences to catch up, and they were getting close. By 4:52 p.m., the boardroom reeked of stress, sweat, and unspoken regret. The $400 million contract was locked behind a digital gate, and the clock was ticking toward a midnight deadline that didn't care about feelings, PowerPoint slides, or hashtags. The air was thick with bad decisions. Greg had gone silent, tapping furiously on his keyboard, probably trying to bribe the federal portal into opening itself with pure desperation. Paul was still on the monitor, his jaw clenched so tight you could hear his molars grind through the speaker. Carly had finally stopped spinning her stainless steel water bottle and was now fidgeting with a lavender stress stone someone had handed out during last quarter's empathy and leadership workshop. The stone was supposed to help with tension. It did not help with the fact that she'd fired the only person standing between the company and an 8-figure implosion. Kip tried to retake control of the room. Okay, he said, hands spread like Moses before a PowerPoint plague. Bring Brenda back, simple fix. Title, email, boom, we hit submit. He looked proud, like he'd just solved climate change with a reorg. Paul's eyes narrowed. You can't, he said. Kip blinked. What do you mean we can't? She worked here last week. We just call her up, toss her a contract, short-term, clean. She signs the thing, we're back in business. Greg cleared his throat and flipped through the printed bylaws like they were a Bible mid-exorcism. Page 67. Clause 14D, subsection Roman 2. The part no one ever thinks matters. He read it out loud. Reinstatement of named officer post-termination shall not restore eligibility until full recertification is completed. Estimated processing time, 5 to 10 business days. The room went still. Paul added, once you offboard a named compliance officer, the federal system treats that status as expired. No backdating. No handshake hires. It's not a weekend freelance gig. It's clearance-level authority. So what are you saying? Kip asked, voice sharper now, that we're just screwed? Paul didn't answer. Greg didn't either. Instead, all eyes slowly turned toward the one name that hadn't been spoken aloud all day. Mine. I'd been silent on the call the entire time, mic muted, camera off. I'd accepted the invite to observe, nothing more. But now they needed me. Like a parachute they'd packed with ego and stuffed into a closet marked irrelevant. Brenda, the board chair asked gently, as if my name might trigger a trapdoor beneath their feet. Do you have any comment? I unmuted. The sound of my breath, even steady and soft, made Carly flinch. I let the pause sit. I wanted them to feel it, not out of cruelty, out of justice. The process is clear, I said calmly. You had the slides, you should have read the rest. Paul smiled into his coffee mug. Kip opened his mouth, but no words came out. You were warned, I continued. Clause 14C was cited in multiple documents. The recertification delay was in every onboarding packet. HR chose to interpret my exit as a decorative reshuffle. Legal should have known better. I leaned forward, speaking directly now, not as an employee, but as the living embodiment of the protocols they'd ignored. This isn't about feelings. It's about documentation, and the documentation is airtight. Carly tried to find her footing. We weren't trying to undermine anything. We just thought. We assumed that I was replaceable. I offered, voice still steady. She blinked fast, lips pressed together like she was tasting regret for the first time. The board chair sighed. What would it take to recertify? 5 business days if you rush it. 10 if you follow proper protocol. Kip looked at the clock. You don't have 5 days. The deadline is midnight. And the system won't accept an invalid signatory, Paul added flatly. Not unless you want to commit federal fraud, in which case I'll need to excuse myself from representation. Kip sat down hard. Greg closed his laptop slowly like he was preparing for a funeral. Someone muttered, Jesus, and then, as if summoned by irony itself, an alert popped up on screen. Rejected for everyone in the room. Federal portal notification, final submission lock initiated. Deadline, 11:59 p.m. ESD status, ineligible, no active named officer. The room fell into that kind of silence where even breath feels too loud. Kip slumped forward, elbows on the table, staring down at his phone like it might offer a last-minute miracle. Carly finally set down her stress stone. Her hands were trembling. I spoke once more. Just one last sentence. This isn't personal, it's procedural. And then I logged off. The pen made a soft tapping sound against the table, barely audible, but it cut through the air like a gunshot. Kip was gripping it so tight his knuckles were white, teeth clenched, jaw twitching like he'd just bitten into something rotten. And maybe he had. At 12:02 a.m., the federal portal refreshed automatically on the large wall screen. The words no CEO ever wants to see came up in perfect bureaucratic font. Contract renewal, expired status, ineligible named compliance officer not verified, no bells, no sirens, just a red line across $400 million in expected revenue, and a digital tombstone where the deal used to be. No extensions, no appeals, no sympathy. Greg exhaled like he'd been underwater. Carly was still staring at her laptop, lips moving but no sound coming out, as if she were praying to the god of PR spin and LinkedIn apologies. It wouldn't help. There was no hashtag that could fix what was coming. On the screen, another set of alerts rolled in behind the deadline message. Automated flag, audit required notice, potential clawback review 18-month window, someone in the room gagged. The CFO, probably. The sound was wet and quiet. Kip finally set the pen down, gently, almost lovingly, like it might shatter if he let go too fast. Then he looked up, eyes not angry, not even shocked, just hollow. The kind of face a man wears when he finally realizes the check engine light wasn't optional. Carly looked at him like a child expecting to be grounded. But he didn't say anything. He just rubbed his temples like he could massage the failure back into its packaging. That's when I stepped into the room. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't have to. Every pair of eyes followed me as if I'd walked in wearing a judge's robe and carrying a gavel made of regret. I approached the head of the table, calm, composed, no notes, no binder, just one small black thumb drive. I placed it gently in front of Kip. These are your archive protocols, I said, fully updated, time-stamped, and indexed. They cover every certification, every revision, and every change request submitted during my tenure. Kip didn't move. I looked around the table at the suits who used to walk past me like I was furniture, at the execs who nodded politely while brushing off my memos, at Carly, whose pupils were now little glass marbles of panic. I trust, I continued, someone else will present them next time. No one said a word, not even Paul, not even Greg, not even Danny, who was probably home crying into a lavender candle and trying to Google what does clawback mean. I straightened my jacket, turned without waiting for thanks, and walked out. No applause, no standing ovation, just silence. But it was the right kind of silence, the kind that follows a surgical strike. Precise, devastating, final. As I passed the elevators, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished chrome. The same blazer, the same hair pulled back. But something behind the eyes had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't need to be seen to be felt. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. I pulled my coat tighter, stepped out onto the pavement, and didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel it behind me, the building, still lit, still buzzing, still full of people who thought procedure was optional until the walls caught fire. Now the walls were burning, and I was already walking into the dark, clean air, leaving the smoke behind. Alone, but never unnoticed again. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.